Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden Podcast with me, Carl Stiansen, and the weekending show team from Lionheart Radio. It's a chance to take a wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees, and an opportunity to hear stories from the past and present. On today's show, everything's rosy in the magical gardens at Alnwick and Howick. And great news for fans of tea. The magnificent Union Chain Bridge over the River Tweed is 200 years old, and we're joining the celebrations. Steve Lowe is walking the South Northumberland coast and looking out for dolphins, sea glass and watchtowers. Tom Cadwallander tells us the heartwarming story of the rare Roseate Tern, plus top gardening tips from Tom. All coming up on today's show. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Summer's here and things have been getting much rosier in our garden spaces. Tom Pattinson's been back to work and out and about enjoying two of our grandest gardens.
Well, I've been visiting a couple of local gardens recently with the lady of the house. After all this lockdown business, we're starting to cautiously get out and about, social distancing still, of course, and the masks where necessary, being very careful. But these two gardens were open, as many other are opening up now, and the thought before we went was, we've missed out on the best part of spring, we've missed out on part of summer with this business. It's time to seize the moment, ICDM, get out there and be cautious, but enjoy it. And we were not disappointed. If you remember that during this length of time, we've been places have been closed down throughout the country, all these gardens open to the public, the staff were furloughed, most of the staff anyway, possibly a skeleton staff in some. And during that time, you think, who's been cutting the grass, who's been weeding, who's been pruning, who's been tending this, that and t'other. And we thought, don't raise your spirits too high, don't expect too much, but what a surprise at both Alnwick and at Howick Hall Gardens. Just brilliant. We had an email because we're volunteers at the Alnwick Garden 2 or 3 weeks ago saying the roses are out, they need deadheading, it's possible for the volunteer gardeners to go back in. Well, that's Judy and myself, so we went in early in the morning. Gosh, those roses. There are many more than 2,000 roses there blooming. And if we don't remove the faded flower heads, they'll stop blooming. They'll be in a mess. So we're doing that, as most of the volunteers do and the gardeners do. And anyone with any sense with roses does. Keep them deadheading, and you can keep them flowering way down into late autumn if you're about it. So we did that, and then up into the ornamental garden, way above the cascade. It is so mature, there's so much colour there. It's a wall garden with climbers on the walls, herbaceous plants in the borders, annuals, bulbs, etc. That's a super area as well. And you know, under normal circumstances, I'm a volunteer guide at the Alnwick Poison Garden within the garden there. We do 20-minute tours, 20 people in the tour, keep them in a group, but obviously that's out of the question at the moment, so we're not required there. But they do have 2 members of staff on there, experienced members of staff, poison garden guides, and they are allowing a certain number in there at a time to walk around, and those 2 staff are patrolling around with them, making sure they're social distancing. And it is working. It's a really important education facility as far as I'm concerned, the Poison Garden at Alnwick. So it is functioning. What they have now is 15 to 20 QR coded posts put beside some of the poisonous plants. And if you have a QR reader on your mobile, you point it at it and you're straight into a YouTube message for about 30 seconds to a minute, which tells you about that particular plant. I think that's brilliant. Going on to Howick, we went to Howick Hall, real tonic walking around the grounds there, of course, social distancing, etc. And most of all, in some of the borders there, the agapanthus and the penstemons, just beautiful to see those. And around by the bog garden, plants in there, astilbes, etc. Oh, they're just superb. But the star of the show at the moment for me at Howick was the sensory garden. It was opened about 2 years ago by the Northumberland branch of the National Autistic Society. I had funding help from the National Gardening Scheme, NGS, Yellow Book Scheme, and it was designed by Natasha McEwen, who I met her on the opening day 2 years or so ago, and then you had to use a bit of imagination. You could see the structure of it, but and she explained at the time it would be a safe and stimulating environment where adults and children with autism could explore with their senses, and you had to use a little bit of imagination. But my goodness, now how quickly it's matured. It's a beautiful garden. All sorts of plants around there and facilities for the people it was designed for, and those grasses, ornamental grasses, and gorgeous achillea and sanguisorba with its long tassels of flowers, just beautiful. And one of the things that I noticed in there, which made me smile, was I thought was so obvious for Howick. There was a lovely group of Monarda. It's called, common name is bergamot, and that's what goes into Earl Grey tea, and that's near the entrance or exit to the this sensory garden. And the thought occurred to me, I can take a hint, the Earl Grey tea house is open again. Again, social distancing, you can be served at the tables outside or inside, but what a lovely idea after an exciting visit.
I've never seen a dolphin, not yet, but I'm going to keep my eyes peeled now. It's the Big Watch weekend. Steve Lowe has been keeping an eye out for the distinctive fins of the white-beaked dolphin on a wonderful stretch of the South Northumberland coast.
Hi there, this is Steve Lowe, and you're joining me tonight on the cliffs between St Mary's Island and Seaton Sluice, which is one of my favourite spots to come in the summer. Actually, I come here all the year round, to be honest with you, but on a summer's night like this, which is a beautiful evening, it's one of my favourite places to come. At the minute, we've got the sun going down behind me. We've got a fiery red sky. The sun's quite bright tonight. It's a little bit breezy. I can hear grasshopper warblers in the background. I've got skylarks in the background, which is an odd mix because there's also fulmars on the cliffs here, and got lots and lots of terns going past as well. But the reason I'm here isn't for any of them. It's in the hope that somewhere in that big blue yonder I'll see a fin. And I often do here, and it may be a massive surprise for a lot of people that we actually get good visits of dolphins, good sightings of dolphins and whales off this coast every year. In particular, in July, I'm here because I'm really keen to see a particular dolphin species called the white-beaked dolphin. And white-beaks only frequent this part of the coast at this time of the year. And work that I've been doing in the local area with the North East Cetacean Project, which is led by a friend of mine called Martin Kitchen, has actually shown that these animals come here in July, and they don't spend an awful lot of time here, but they're on the coast round about, between sort of Sunderland and a little bit further north. And they're probably coming here because they have their young here. Now, they're not being conceived here, they're being born here. And then the animals seem to go to the Farn Deeps, which is quite a long way off, 25, 26 miles offshore, where they seem to gather to feed, etc. Because the Farn Deeps there is probably one of the deepest parts of the North Sea, which, believe it or not, is actually quite a shallow sea. The rest of the year, they're actually down in the Dogger Bank. So they have this particular sort of life cycle, of which the northeast coast is particularly important. And I have to say that these are actually probably one of my favourite animals to see. Very privileged to get out on boats and see them occasionally. And when you do, you cannot be disappointed. I mean, anyone would love to see dolphins and whales anyway, but actually to see the whitebeaks is a particular favourite for me. And last couple of years we've seen a few. And I remember on one boat trip watching one adult swimming upside down, bow riding the boat for about, a mile or two. And it was just amazing to see. And they're quite spectacular as well in that they jump out of the water. And they've got this sort of quite a white stripe down the side of them, which makes them quite distinctive. In fact, actually, when I say distinctive, I think a lot of people have seen them in the past and thought they were killer whales. But they're not. But we're very, very lucky to have them off this coast. Also at the minute, we've got a group of bottlenose dolphins that are going up and down. They're being seen quite regularly, giving people some good sightings from places like Tynemouth or Sea Houses, New Biggin, Cresswell, those sorts of places. And there seems to be 2 or 3 pods of those. And we do know from identifying the fins that these animals actually originated from Scotland. And they're actually in the Moray Firth, and there are 1 or 2 individuals there which are quite easily recognisable from their fin patterns, and it's brilliant to see them. Totally unbelievably, although we do get whales on this coast as well, and some people will probably be aware of the fact we had a sperm whale die on the coast last year, but unbelievably, just a few days ago, off the Farns was this enormous fin whale surfaced right next door to one of the boats that was going to the Farns. And a fin whale is probably the 3rd largest whale in the world, I think this. An amazing sight to see something that big in this part of the world. Now, we've actually got a weekend celebrating dolphins coming up, the big watch weekend. If you put Big Watch Weekend in, you'll probably find details of that. Or you could look at the Northeast Cetacean Project, or you could also look at the ERIC Northeast website, which is ERIC is the Environmental Records Information Centre for the Northeast, and that's where we log all of our sightings. If you do see any wildlife, that's the place to go and tell people about it.
The Union Chain Bridge is the daddy of all suspension bridges. It's provided a link between Scotland and England across the River Tweed, 7 miles up from Berwick, for 2 centuries. Its 200th birthday is being celebrated in style, and I caught up on a slightly windy day with Martha Andrews, a trustee of the magnificent Union Chain Bridge. Martha, this has got to be one of the most wonderful sights in England, Scotland, Britain, maybe the world. It's a brilliant piece of engineering. Can you just describe what it is we're standing on?
We're standing on the Union Chain Bridge, which spans the border over the River Tweed between Northumberland and Scotland. And it's the first suspension bridge in the world to carry vehicles, in the Guinness Book of Records now. And it was designed by Sam Brown from the Royal Navy. And it was first opened on the 26th of July 1820, so 200th anniversary. To the people who lived here at the time, it must have looked like an incredible spider's web going up, and whether they believed it would actually carry the wagons of coal and lime from Northumberland through to Scotland, whether they actually believed that or not, who knows, but they all turned out in force to actually watch the opening. It's a structure with a roadway that's hung from cast iron rods from suspension poles above, and there's a tower on the Scottish side, and on the English side the cables go into anchor plates in the ground. There used to be a little toll house here, and used to collect the tolls for people crossing the bridge. And it's tiny. It's just a few metres rectangular little house, but a family lived there, and it wasn't demolished until about 50 years ago. It's an amazing place to be. You can hear the birds, you can see otters, and when something drives over the bridge you feel it bounce, because it really is hanging in midair.
I think we've got a car coming now, and they've got to squeeze through this tiny gap there. I guess some vehicles won't be able to make it across, but back in the day it was horse and cart and people.
Yes, that's right. It'd be the horse and quite heavily loaded wagons, and on the bollards, there were bollards either side of the bridge to try and limit the size of vehicles going across, because there's a 2-ton limit, and you can see the scrapes of paint at quite varying levels. People obviously call it wing mirrors or wheel arches or whatever. And when something does go across, the bounce is absolutely amazing, and if it's windy you can really feel the wind rocking the bridge.
We're about to experience it. Very careful driving there, and yeah, there it goes.
Yes, it's like being at sea. It really rocks, but that's part of the design, and that's what's kept it here so long. Samuel Brown had retired from the Navy, and he had an ironworks in South Wales that he set up with his cousin, and he wanted to prove the strength of the iron that he was making. His aim was to introduce chains into the Navy instead of the ropes for the rigging and for the anchors, because the anchor ropes would break and the ship would founder and lives would be lost. As a Navy man, he wanted to stop this. He wanted to prove to the Navy that his chains were strong enough, and he actually had his first chains on HMS Penelope, and that was a major step forward for the Navy. But this bridge here is the father of all suspension bridges, which is why the Japanese, with their massive suspension bridges, were going to come here for the celebrations on Sunday. The Americans, with the Golden Gate Bridge, they were going to come here. But we couldn't have, obviously with the pandemic, the event we were going to have, so we've published the papers in a little booklet, which is available from the Friends of the Union Chain Bridge website. And there's a big project starting with project officers working out of Berwick Museum, and their website, unionchainbridge.org, goes live at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, and there'll be lots of activities for children on there, a wee film, and just information about the bridge and how you can get involved.
Brilliant stuff. Well, I'm pleased. It looks in pretty good nick. I imagine it takes a bit of work to keep it right, though.
Well, the plan is that starting in a couple of months' time, they're going to take it down completely, like a giant Meccano set, clean it all, replace the bits that need replacing, look at the stonework on the piers, and then repaint it and put it all back up so it'll stay for another 150 years at least.
And you can find out more about the bridge at unionchainbridge.org. Getting out and about is something we've missed this spring, and it's time to play catch-up and to enjoy our own garden borders, pots and creativity. Let's share some cosmic summertime gardening joy with Tom.
Although we're getting out to visit more gardens, other people's, never underestimate the impact of your own. If you're lucky enough to have a little bit of space where you can put some tubs, hanging baskets, containers, large pots, and they've got blooms in throughout summer, that will keep you in good spirits, keep a big smile on your face, and that's what it's all about for me. We're fortunate in having a garden with a mixed border with shrubs, herbaceous perennials and annuals, yes, and bulbs in, keeping us going. And some of those are really special because the long flowering period they have. Just excellent. And one or two which are fleeting in their flowering, which come up for a short while and flower, I accept those as well, because the background is those constantly flowering plants, and if I keep deadheading them, they'll keep pleasing me by sending up more flowers. That's the name of the game. So I'm looking out at them, and I'm looking at one particular plant in the border at the moment, and that is Lavatera barnsley. Normally it's a white flowering shrub. There's a pink one, albeit rosier, and it's a bit like, for growth, it's a bit like the budlegia, the butterfly bush, in that it grows from almost ground level after your severe spring pruning way up to 2 meters high or more each year. But they've improved Lavatera barnsley. They now have what they call baby barnsley, which was developed especially for container growth. Well, I've tried it in container growth, and now I'm trying it in the border, and it's brilliant. It's growing up to about 1 meter tall, and it's given me a combination of these open bell-shaped flowers, pink and white, which I'm loving. And of course, I know it will keep on flowering until deepest autumn with me. Really is a good shrub to have in your flower border throughout the summer. Although we have a mixture of rose types, and I love the David Austin fragrances and things, in here we have climbers, we have shrub roses, etc. There is one which is a favourite simply because of its flowering period. I know I can keep the David Austin roses flowering continuously throughout summer if I keep on deadheading them. But this one, Rose Cecile Brunner, called the Sweetheart Rose, it doesn't mind if it's not deadheaded. It just keeps on producing flowers anyway, way up to the frost. I've known it to be flowering in late November with me. And it's just raised from hardwood stem cuttings, taken in the October-November period and stuck in the garden. So simple to propagate, but what a joy it is to have in the garden. I have that at the moment, and there's several groups of lavender out there, and I suppose that shows you our appreciation of lavender, because it is long flowering, and the bees love it, of course. And also out there attracting bees at the moment are the Nepeta Six Hills Giant. That's the catmint, and it's starting to fade. One or two of the plants are starting to fade, but if I clip them down to ground level, which I do with some of the herbaceous perennials this time of year, I couldn't get to ground level, they've got a chance to grow again and to flower again. I'm looking around at some of the herbaceous perennials, and those that keep on flowering most of the time are the herbaceous geraniums. There's one there, Roseanne, a favourite, and of course Johnson's Blue. Beautiful plants. There's quite a lot of them to choose from, but if they start fading, just give them a clip, and they'll scent a bit like a Chelsea chop, only it's way after Chelsea now, and they'll grow again, and given an open back end, they'll flower again, just to keep the bees happy. They're out there, and oh goodness, herbaceous perennials. Nepeta gerania I mentioned, the penstemon with those lovely tubular flowers. You'd see the bees, bumblebees going into them now and making them vibrate. Got lots of different varieties of those. There are available. I've got about 10 different varieties, ranging from purples to reds to whites to plums to pinks, and beautiful plants worth having in the garden, long flowering. The garden pinks, the fragrance from those is just beautiful. I'll take some more cuttings from those. I propagated some from them last year, and they are just so good for fragrance and continuous flowering, of course. But you know, in the garden, in one of my 2 or 3 of my troughs I have, the simplest planting of all. It's just persevering. I know it will not let me down. I keep watering it. In there, I have cosmos, a tallish, annual, pink and white and red, hardy annual. I also have in there begonia semperflorens, which has a bronze leaf, and it has white and red flowers, a mixture of those. And also with it, the simplest plant of all, if you mention hanging baskets or summer bedding, you've got to mention the word lobelia. And I have a blue and white lobelia. And those 3, the combination of those 3, they're just beautiful. Simplicity itself, but flowering especially for me.
This is the Nature Garden Podcast with Carl Stiansen, Tom Pattinson, Tom Cadwallender and Steve Lowe.
Our beautiful Northumbrian coastline is home to many species of birds, and our islands are vital to the survival of some. I asked Tom Cadwallander from the British Trust for Ornithology to tell us about a wonderful bird that turns up on our coastline every year, but not so long ago. Things weren't so rosy, were they, Tom?
Did you know, Carl, that we have the UK's rarest breeding seabird right here in Northumberland, and it's the Roseate Tern, and they breed on Coquet Island. And Coquet Island is the only regular breeding site for them in the UK, and the island is run by the RSPB as a nature reserve. But it's superficially like all the other terns that we have during the breeding season here. Very similar to the common Arctic and sandwich terns, and by virtue of the fact that it has this black cap and has a white body and sort of kind of silvery grey wings and red legs. But you look at the bill, that's kind of helpful in trying to sort them out, because the bill of a roseate tern is generally black with a red base to it, whereas the Arctic tern is a red bill, completely red bill. The common tern is a red bill with a black tip, and the sandwich tern is a black bill with a yellow tip. So you can see there's a sort of difference going on there. But if you can see it, the real difference is the this kind of roseate or pink kind of hue that the upper breast has during the breeding season. And sometimes in certain lights, it really does stand out. It's quite an attractive feature. But anyway, it is quite an incredibly rare seabird, but it's gone through an incredible decline since the kind of the 60s, the 1960s and 70s. But let's go back to the beginning of it. As I've mentioned, these terns that we have are quite difficult to sort out, and at least particularly in the 19th century, the identifying these birds were quite difficult, and we didn't really know of its existence until one was collected in the Forth of Clyde in 1812, I think it was, by a local doctor called MacDougall, and that gave rise to its scientific name, Sterna dougalli. But anyway, in those days, in the kind of the mid-19th century, it was quite a widespread bred in colonies right around the UK. It was never very common. It was never not like the Arctics and common terns, but it was widespread. And even in Northumberland, we had colony on the Farne Islands and indeed on the mainland at Lindisfarne. And these populations, these colonies in Northumberland were 200 to 300 birds or pairs strong. But since those kind of days, the population has declined. It's found rarely around the shores of the UK these days. And even it's gone from the Farnes, it's gone for the mainland colony at Lindisfarne, and at one place near Anglesey, it used to be the very, very good place for them, but they're not found there anymore, which is really quite sad. So the concentration has been remains on Coquet Island. I was invited to get involved in monitoring of this bird back in the early 1990s. There was great concern, as you would expect, about the huge decline in the population from those 200 to 300 pairs that on the Farne Islands, for example, down to almost nothing, 20 pairs. In fact, when I first started working on roseate terns in 1991, there were 20 pairs breeding on Coquet Island, and that was it. And really, there weren't that many more around the whole country. And since that time, we've lost all the other satellite colonies, but Coquet's remained as being the kind of the stronghold. Well, it's a great sort of kind of a story. So back in those early days, it was amazing how they were just hanging on. They like to nest in close by old puffin burrows. So when there's predators coming, or when the chicks first hatch, they can actually nip into the puffin burrows for safekeeping, if you like. But the big turnaround, I think, has been in the advent of nest boxes. You know, we're conditioned to think about nest boxes for blue tits and other small passerine birds, other songbirds. But actually, it's quite an interesting one to think that nest boxes work for roseate terns. And when I first started on Coquet Island, roseate terns nested right across the island, and they were never sort of, and they were really quite hard to find. There were never any concentrations of them. But now we've got them, we've managed to kind of train them, if you like, to nest in nest boxes, which are just laying on the ground. Normally they'll build their nest, which is only a little scrape and some in the shingle or shells, and they might adorn the little shingle scrape with one or two shells. But they actually got them all trained now to lay their eggs in the nest boxes, but occasionally the odd one will lay just outside. And we've got them all on terraces as well, so it's really quite easy to manage. But the nest boxes afford quite a high level of security for two different main reasons. One is predation. There are lots of the big gulls, the greater blackbacks and herrings, will actually sort of do for the chicks. So there's some protection there. Also for the bad weather. So they're inside the little nest boxes when the bad weather comes in. So it's there is some protection there. So that's really quite useful. So yes, and over the years, the population has declined. And one of the major reasons for the decline is that, we know these birds go down to Ghana in Africa for their winter. Ghana is in West Africa, and it's got midway around, sort of right round the kind of the bulge of kind of West Africa, and it's tucked into that sort of little niche in there. And there was a big issue about the fact that they were collected by the young Ghanaian boys down there, and the RSPB put in an education program and so forth, and they've kind of turned that around a wee bit. But anyway, back here during the breeding season, our nest boxes have provided great sort of protection for them, and the numbers have gradually built since those days. And I say I got involved in 1991 ringing these birds, and it's quite incredible how the population has sort of just gradually over the years improved. In the last sort of 5 or 6 years, there's been a huge increase. We've now got up to 130 pairs this year, which is absolutely incredible when you consider back in 1990 there were 20 pairs. We've now made that huge step up, and the colony is almost self-functioning. There's a huge colony in Ireland at Rockabill, and that was previously been the kind of the reservoir of all these birds that were kind of supplementing the Coquet population. But now actually we're self-supporting, if you like, and we know that through our ringing work we can read the rings that have been put on these birds' legs, and we know where these birds are coming from, and we can actually plot them quite easily. So we know that lots of Coquet birds are coming back into the population to breed, which is tremendous, actually tremendous. So there's been a great success story in our part of the world, in Northumberland, for the Roseate Tern. And I, for one, am incredibly privileged to have been part of that whole thing. This year is my 29th season, so I'm hoping I'm going to get my 30th season. So it's something sort of quite a reward, in actual fact. But I'm really privileged to have been involved in that sort of success story. It's absolutely tremendous, and hats off to the lads and lasses who have acted as wardens on the island and made that difference to those birds. It's a great story. It's a great story, and one we should be proud of, that we have these roseate terns in Northumberland.
Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust is making the most of some splendid walks around the Collywell Bay area of Northumberland, and he's been looking out for some not so well known landmarks there.
Hi, it's Steve Lowe from Northumberland Rivers Trust. I've had a wander out tonight down to Collywell Bay in St Sluice, and I've come down past the pub at Old Hartley on the top of the headland there, and it reminded me that my friend used to live in one of the houses there, and her house actually contained the remains of an army camp which was situated at the top of the hill there, and it made me think, oh, that's quite a nice story to share. Not only because the army camp was there, obviously, and you can still see remains of it. It's actually a listed building, a scheduled monument, I think. And it has a big water tower there. And one of the interesting features of it is that there's a Lowe there, which has got a gun slit, so you could literally be defending Queen and Country while you had your pants caught down, really. But anyway, moving on. The reason I wanted to tell this little story is because in the First World War, there was a massive gun emplacement built on the cliffs here, and you can't see much of it left now, but it was called the Roberts Battery. And what was put there was a gun from an old battleship, or guns I should say, from an old battleship. Now it took that long to put in place so that it never actually saw action. But the plans for it are quite ambitious, and it has its own little railway which runs between the camp and the gun emplacement, which used to carry the shells, or was designed to carry the shells for it, and it was sunk into the cliffs and would have given an absolutely magnificent view and defensible position from here, all the way across from St Mary's. You can see all the way up the New Biggin Church Point from here. It's no problem. But there's not a sign of it left yet. So it's one of those little things, little quirks that unless you know about it, really, you're not going to hear much about it. The other thing about Seaton Sluice and Collywell in particular is, and I quite often come here and find bits of old, well, it's not glass, it's actually slag from a glassworks, because Seaton Sluice had one of the largest exports of bottles in the UK at one point in time. And the bottle factory are no longer here. But what you do see when you come to Seaton Sluice, what looks like a dune just by the harbour, is the old ballast hills. And when the boats came in empty, they had to have a ballast in them. And that was all sort of flint and that sort of thing. And that's actually what makes those hills up, because when that was emptied, it was just dumped, and the cargo was put back in, the glass cargo was put back in, and off it went. Seaton Sluice was also a really important place for the export of salt, and the salt pans down in Hartley pans as it's known, produce some of the finest quality salt anywhere in the world, so it was claimed. And that was another export from this area. In addition to that, of course, we had coal being exported from here, from Hartley Colliery, and the whole lot was owned by the Delaval family, and it was the Delavals who actually created the sluice. It was all dug by hand in order to get boats out to sea on a poor tide, so that they could get out, because you'll see the harbour now, it's actually quite angular, but the cut that goes right the way through was actually put in, and you can see the remains of wharves and all sorts of things there. It's a spectacular sight, and the fact that this was all done by hand is amazing. And the other thing in the area is the Melton Constable, and the Melton Constable was actually the name of a racehorse that one of the Delavals lost in the family fortune, or let's just say that. So an interesting little area, Seaton Sluice, and quite a lot of the stuff is it's not obvious, so you've got to know a wee bit about it. There's loads of information available, and if you do get the chance, when the watchtower is open on the island, it's well worth a visit.
I think it's time for some jobs for the week in the garden. Over to you, Tom.
It's jobs for the week time, and one of my ongoing activities at the moment is propagation. Propagation from stem cuttings, leaf cuttings, and propagation from sowings outdoors in the open garden. There is so much young growth going, and when you consider the price of plants, a 1 litre, 2 litre potted plant, quite expensive, and in your own garden the solution often lies. There is so much material there, just for the sake of removing, say, a top this year's growth from a shrub, which is about 10 centimetres long, dressing down to leave just 2 pairs of leaves at the top and the rest of the stem bare, and just leave below a leaf joint at the bottom, the cut, that's where the rooting takes place, and they would root in water, if necessary, standing in a tumbler of water. But better still, get organised, get yourself a tray, a seed tray with a domed top on to keep the moisture in, fill it with a gritty, sandy compost, and that will breathe and that will help root those stem cuttings. And any stem cuttings I take, whether it's herbs, and there are quite a few of those ready at the moment for stem cuttings, or heathers, winter heathers, which you've got a good lot of new growth on at the moment, ideal for cutting material, and fuchsias, so many fuchsias out there, hardy fuchsias. They root like hot cakes at the moment, if that makes sense. Get those into water beforehand. Soak them in a bowl of water for about an hour so they're fully charged with it, and then they're sturdy and they're in the best possible condition to go into that compost and root. That's a big job for me at the moment. I'm looking at the rosemary herb, lovely shoots on it, and the sage, it has shoots on too, and the thyme. Just look around them. They'll almost tell you, root me. And what a lot of money you can save yourself. That's ongoing through the coming weeks. I'm sowing out in the open garden. Wallflowers for next spring. Get sowing now in a drill outdoors, buy a packet of seed, sow them, and they'll germinate out there. You can separate them out later and probably prick them out, give them a bit of distance between them in, say, a couple of months' time, let them grow on a bit, and then they can go in their final position. A lot of herbaceous perennials, flowering herbaceous perennials, and if a perennial, you're going to have it for years and years and years, and keep dividing it up over the coming years, just for the price of a packet of seed. A good example of this is about 2 years ago. I like pyrethrum, which is a daisy-like flower, gets to about 2 feet, 60 centimetres tall, and it's just going off flowering now, but it has red, pink, white flowers. Gorgeous plant. And I wanted some of those. Looked at the price in the garden centre. A 2-litre pot was in about £5 mark. I'd bought a packet of seed 2 years ago, sowed them in drills, and I can't tell you how many plants I've forgotten how many plants I got altogether, just a lot. From that, potted them on, gave some to the garden club, etc., and I've got groups of them now flowering in the border. Look for flowering herbaceous perennials, and on the packet it will tell you, sow them outdoors in a drill July, August. Get on with that. I'm watering as usual, and especially any plants that are out in containers, hanging baskets, window boxes, and that sort of thing. Those plants, I mentioned before, the roots are confined. They rely on you for a water supply and a food supply. So water and feed them regularly. Mechanical weed control with a hoe. Be careful if you're hoeing between vegetables and there's quite a bit of chickweed or groundsel in there, because there are a lot of young frogs around at the moment and they can be harmed. I go and I get down my knees, hands and knees, and I hand weed those. It's quite amazing the number of frogs that are migrating, and they're in different from the pond, and they're in different parts of the garden at the moment, especially the vegetable garden. They're searching out for slugs and that sort of thing. They're our friends, so take care when you're weeding. I'm also looking at harvesting some of the onions and shallots. Some of my onion sets have finished early. They're a decent size and the tops are turning over, which means they've finished growing. So it's my job now to get them dried off, ready for storage. And the shallots are certainly ready for storage. They've finished growing. So don't waste any of those, and don't waste an opportunity. I have a little wire cage just raised above ground level, and I lay them on the wire cage, and they simply dry off on there, sort of a hammock for them to lie in and to dry off, ready for storage. Also at the moment, don't miss out on those ripening fruits. There are so many of them at the moment. Blackberry, raspberry, gooseberry, red and black currant. If you can't eat them straight away, freeze them. They'll freeze. Most will freeze reasonably well. or get them turned into jam. Whatever you do, don't waste anything in the garden. Everything's got a use. Even if you're just standing looking at it and sniff a flower. Look after everything. Keep on deadheading. And for goodness sake, enjoy your gardening. This is summer.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson, Birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust and Naturally Northumbria, and Martha Andrews, a trustee of the Union Chain Bridge. I'm Carl Stiansen, and the 3 house martin chicks we're looking after, they're doing fine and we're hoping they'll start to fly soon. Do check out our podcast, Twitter and Facebook page, The Nature Garden, and our website, The Nature Garden Notebook. That's The Nature Garden Notebook, all one word, .com. And, well, that's it from us for a few weeks as we take a summer break, but we'll be back in September. A muckle big thanks to all our contributors who make the show happen and to you, dear listener. Wishing you a great August. Bye for now.